Advanced TV Herstory, where hearty discussions of all things TV draws a smart circle around the women who've made it all happen. In each installment, we'll celebrate, educate, illustrate, or analyze, all in hopes of reaching listeners with the message that TV and women are very much a part of our lives, and we like talking about them. Revisit great moments or legacies of talented women. It's all a ticket to inspiration and aspiration. So find this podcast alongside the great ones at Core Temp Arts Network, at Libsyn, Google Music, iTunes, and Auto Radio. Engage with us on Twitter. Our handle is @TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Enjoy.
Her car broke down and we'd like to use your phone to call the Automobile Club.
Oh, please, it's right there. Help yourself.
Thank you very much. Oh, boy, I'm tired. We must have hiked 10 miles.
Oh, Viv, don't exaggerate. It was only 2 miles.
It was 10 miles. I got 10 blisters to prove it.
You girls must be exhausted. I'll get you some lemonade.
Oh, please, we don't want to be any trouble.
Oh, it's no trouble. Please, just make yourselves comfortable.
Thank you.
Make ourselves comfortable.
Well, she meant well. What?
Did she look kind of familiar to you?
Come to think of it, yeah.
Here's something you can sit on and rest while I make the lemonade, okay? And it won't be long.
Thank you.
Joan Crawford!
In a 1968 episode of The Lucy Show. That's right, you recognize the voices of Lucille Ball and Vivian Vance. The car that Lucy and Viv are driving breaks down on the road. The road is a mile or two from Joan Crawford's house, Joan Crawford being an icon, even to Lucy and Viv. There it was, 3 Hollywood legends, the 3 of them together, camping it up on prime time with a mediocre script and an even more hackneyed premise. To make a buck near the end of their careers.
Oh, what's she doing here?
What do you mean?
This is terrible. A big star like her reduced to working as a maid.
Oh, I don't think she's a maid.
Well, then how come she's dressed like that and she's cleaning this place?
I think this is her house and she's broke. She probably sold all of her furniture just to buy food.
Oh, no.
Oh, Lucy, when the big ones fall, they really fall.
Now, if you're like me, you loved the miniseries Feud that FX TV brought us earlier this year. It was the tremendously rich, oh my gosh, visually rich, dialogue-rich, factually rich series that detailed the development and the release of what turned out to be an iconic, sort of thriller, sort of freakish hagsploitation film called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And it has given the students of women in TV a lot to think about. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was this big mashup of sorts of Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, 2 supreme stars who had never been on the screen together in the same movie. And here they were in the twilight of their careers. If you watched Feud, you would see that when Joan Crawford needed to skewer her opponent, Bette Davis, to just really poke her in the ribs in a vulnerable moment, Crawford reminded Davis of the small, mediocre roles on TV that Bette Davis was on one episode of Perry Mason. That's exactly what would stick in her craw, the fact that their careers had changed so much. Ooh, burn. But in fact, the 60s were the decade where the first generation of movie stars either willingly or begrudgingly migrated to TV rather than allowing themselves to totally be put out to pasture. Just what kind of TV? Well, we're going to talk about that. Welcome, everybody. You are listening to Advanced TV Herstory, and this particular installment, we are going to take a step back to a time, the 60s as it was, when there was really a transition for the older film actress to find herself with the opportunities to be on TV. But what were those opportunities? And how did that impact her overall career then to be able to flip back and forth from TV to the silver screen? We have that today. Goodness gracious, there are numerous examples of actresses who are able to do both. But back in the 60s, there were some really, really deep and fine lines. And today we have a guest. We have Bryan Johnson, who is a bit of an expert on this whole topic and how it relates particularly to Joan Crawford. The idea for this installment came about as a result of my watching all 8 episodes of Feud, which I found to be fantastic. And that is the FX series that was an in-depth look at a movie. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But it was a movie that featured Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, 2 of the greatest legends of the silver screen. So we have Bryan Johnson here. I want to quickly jump into Bryan Johnson's background and really what he has done, what he has built. And then we will talk about this whole topic of the older actress, TV, and how TV has become a better place for those older actresses. So without further ado, welcome Bryan Johnson. Okay, so you were talking about the fact that across biographies and really any resource material about Joan Crawford's career, there was only about 10% or so that had anything to do with those latter 17 years or so of her life, which are sort of the years where she definitely she's on TV. She's on TV every year, as well as crossing the country for Pepsi. So keep going with how it is that you got this whole concluding chapter of Joan Crawford going.
So I started researching into various newspapers and magazines that were from the 60s and 70s and found a really big wealth of information about her through those resources. Also through a lot of libraries and archives, I was able to find information. And in particular with her television work, there is a researcher who goes by the name Billy Casson, which is an alias for him for all the work that he does to discover the television and raw material of Joan Crawford that's out there as far as interviews on television. And he discovered a lot of things in archives that he has since put out there for a lot of fans to enjoy.
So there's you, and then there's Billy. Is that what you said his name was?
He has the name Billy Casson that he goes by, and he doesn't do as much with researching as he once did. But a lot of his material, he would find it would be quite expensive to research it, to have it converted for master reels. And then he would sell them for very small amounts, really, to fans. And it was just to recoup the cost of getting the material and having it converted. And because of the age of YouTube and so forth that's came along in the past several years, a lot of it has been put on YouTube before he was able to recoup a lot of the costs for researching it. So he's had to take a little bit of a step back from doing it. But a good chunk of her television work is out there now, and a lot of that is to his credit as far as getting the actual information from. He would get some information from me, but a lot of the research was done by him to obtain a lot of those episodes that are actually out there now.
Well, we have to tip our hats to you and Billy both for really recognizing that this was something worth preserving. And it's really a story that I think has a certain amount of feminism to it, as well as the industry and the triangle that we know of, which is the silver screen, the TV screen, and Broadway or the theater. And the fact that those very, very deep lines of crossing over across those platforms have become much more blurred. And I think that we are, to some degree, I suppose what that means is that the bigger the star, the more likely they can command any one of those platforms. And there's no more of that exclusivity. But anyway, getting back to then your website, which it sounds like takes on some of Billy's work, as well as certainly builds in a tremendous amount of research on your part. Tell us a little bit about where we find your website and what we will find once we get there.
Well, the website is www.theconcludingchapterofcrawford.com. It has an entire chronological date from day to day of Joan Crawford's life during the 60s and 70s. That's took a 15-year commitment. It's still ongoing every day. It seems like I find a new date of different things that she was doing during this time period. So that's a very fascinating part of my website. It has the most in-depth amount of information regarding her television work on my website. There is no other resource, book, website, or so forth that's going to have the amount of information that mine contains regarding her television appearances and some of the backstory information on it. It contains a lot of in-depth backstory on her film work also during the time, which is a lot more minimal than her television. I have a small section devoted to even the missed opportunities of film work and television work that she had during the 60s and 70s that, for one reason or another, she did not portray the character, or the project fell through, or she was replaced with someone else prior to actual filming.
And so I'll ask the question up front. So Feud, put on by FX, produced by Ryan Murphy, or developed by Ryan Murphy, certainly. Did they ever contact you then, or do you know whether or not they used the material that's on your website?
Well, I was never contacted. However, I do know from watching the show that there was material used from my website for the television show. That was information that was in no other resource but my website. In particular, the floor plan for Joan Crawford's final apartment was very closely replicated on the Feud final episode, and the only place that they could have found that would have been my website. I had the actual layout blueprint for that apartment, which I'm very glad they did use that. I do like that they tried to be as authentic as possible. There was some information regarding Joan Mamacita that was taken directly from my website, in particular the incidents of Joan Crawford throwing things at her. That was told to me directly from the family of Mamacita, whose actual name was Anna Brink. And that was told to me 15 years ago. I'm still in touch with the family, but that would have been taken directly from the website also.
You know, if you're on YouTube and you're kind of trolling for the Feud, for the TV show itself and Jessica Lange, she talks about immersing herself. She kind of says she spent a huge amount of time just immersing herself in all that there was about Joan Crawford. I have to believe that Jessica Lange spent hours at your website just processing through all of the bits of detail across your, 9 or 10 tabs that chronicle her activity, as well as those missed opportunities, the TV experiences, all the links. So you've really done a comprehensive job of presenting that, and you do deserve credit. I thought that the FX production was very rich. Thank you. All right, so we get to this point where Joan Crawford's career really is. There are more layers, I think, in the understanding of how Joan Crawford managed the last 17 years of her career, even than we understand about Bette Davis. And we'll get into some others in a minute. So how is it then you are watching some TV as a teenager? What ultimately is your background that kind of kept this in your head? What is it with you and TV and movies that has sort of fed this as a hobby and or partly a calling?
Prior to discovering Joan Crawford, I was always a fan of films, especially classic films. I was very much a fan of Alfred Hitchcock films, and the way I discovered Joan Crawford was through Baby Jane, and the way I discovered Baby Jane was simply seeing the title in a video rental store. I thought it was a very odd title for a film, and that's what attracted me to watching it. My background as far as my life really has no comparison that I see in relation to Joan Crawford's or anything in relation to the film Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. So I don't really know what the real correlation is between Joan Crawford and the fascination that I have with her. But I know from just my own talking with other fans and so forth that there's not really one common denominator as to why certain fans are attracted to Joan Crawford and why they become fascinated with her. So that's a very interesting question. I wish I had more of an answer for it than that, but I think it's something where either you really like Joan Crawford or you really don't. I think she's one of those types.
So it's more of a hobby, and in your day job, you are in a cubicle, or you've got a window, or you've got something else going on other than being a fan scholar and a writer and a website builder.
Oh yes, yes. My days are pretty busy with work and other activities that I do, and it really is a squeeze to get in a lot of the researching that I do for Joan Crawford. But I do keep it going, and I am continuously finding new information and adding it to the website. But yes, my days between work and what I am doing in my personal life, as far as other hobbies and activities, which seem to last the entire day, I do find myself at the end of the day, sometimes in the early hours of the night, working heavily on the computer to add more content that I've researched. So, but it's a labor of love. It's something that I really do like doing, and of course, if I didn't, I would not find myself at the end of the day trying to scammer to put these little tidbits of information online.
All right, so we're gonna segue back over to Feud, the FX series that lasted 8 episodes. They are calling it season 1, and I'm not sure if there's any sense that it's going to get brought back. I haven't heard that, but I will ask. Did you watch it, and have you watched those episodes multiple times?
Oh yes, I watched the episodes as they premiered, and there are several of them that I've watched multiple times. On first viewing, for someone that is a fan of Joan Crawford, in particular one who has researched Joan Crawford's life as much as I have, it could be a little frustrating to watch it because there would be little inaccuracies here and there throughout the episodes. Not major inaccuracies, but little ones. So sometimes I would watch it on the premiere night and go back and rewatch it and like it a little better the next time because I was expecting those little inaccuracies. So I was able to enjoy more of the story and enjoy the episodes for what they were. And but I do have to say that overall, I do think that they captured the essence of Joan Crawford's life during the 60s, and the essence of her relationship and feud, if you want to call it that, with Bette Davis. I think the essence of it was captured.
They had to put an awful lot into that last season to kind of get it away from the Baby Jane, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, that whole sort of break, and then kind of carry her through almost like 10 years or so up until her death. So they just had to really crank, I thought, pretty aggressively, and probably missed a lot of detail.
Oh yes, definitely. But overall, the essence of her life in the late 60s and early 70s, they captured that. I think that like I was speaking about inaccuracies that they had, one very big rumor is regarding her last film, Trog, that she had to change her wardrobe in a van on location. That's not true. That's something that has been written in a couple of the biographies, so I do know where they obtained that. But Herman Cohen, who was the producer of that, he confirmed that that was not true at all, that she did have her own huge bungalow on location where she changed, and she still got the star treatment even on that last film. So that part of it's not true, but I thought that certain scenes like the replicating the sets of Trog was very fascinating. They did a extraordinarily fascinating job of replicating that.
Cool. Okay, so the opportunity to watch Feud, to understand how it fits into the context of older women actresses of the silver screen who are now looking at TV, the contracts and the payouts for movie roles that they experienced, and what they were able to save from all that is not nearly what people enjoy today, what women have the opportunity, whether it's Nicole Kidman or Goldie Hawn or Meryl Streep. They are very, very different salary ranges from the 40s and 50s when Joan Crawford and Bette Davis were pretty much at the top of their careers. So tell us a little bit about how Joan Crawford's finances kept her always sort of hunting for any opportunity, whether it was on TV or in the movies. And those movie roles were very few and far between. So was she in debt the way that they depicted her?
Well, she wasn't in debt in the way that she's depicted in Feud. What happened was, with the passing of her husband, Alfred Still, she no longer had the security that she thought she had with him. He died with an estate that was essentially insolvent. It was not settled, I recently discovered, until 1966. He died in 1959. It took 7 years to settle his estate. There was a lot of different issues that were relating to Pepsi at the time of his death that held up his estate. But it was Pepsi Cola that really kept the lifeblood of Joan Crawford flowing, in the sense of keeping her living in a comfortable lifestyle. Following Alfred Still's death, she was immediately voted onto the board of directors. And through various contacts I've had with Pepsi Cola, who were with Pepsi Cola at the time of Joan's residency with their company, she was paid $75,000 per year. The president of the company made $100,000 a year. And so that gives a little bit of insight to how much they valued her and how much they felt her to be an asset to their company. And with that, she was able to still live the lifestyle of Joan Crawford. Not only did she receive the $75,000 a year salary from them as a board member, she also received a lot of little perks. Her health care was through Pepsi Cola. They gave her a salary for her own secretary. They gave her a salary for her clothing. They gave her a salary for her hairstyle. They gave her a salary for her car service. So she pretty much could conduct herself as she always had, at the expense of Pepsi, because she was essentially a spokesperson for the company and sort of a poster girl for the company. So they wanted her to look well. And so they afforded her all of these things. So with some of her ventures, she made very good salaries on. Baby Jane, she made a very good salary on, because she took more of a percentage of the film's profits than Bette Davis even did. And with her follow-up film, Straitjacket, it is a B film. However, it was very well received by audiences and was a very big hit at the box office. And that, again, was another film that she took a percentage of the film as opposed to an upfront salary to. And so she made very well on Straitjacket. The other aspects of her life, from what I've researched and from documentation that I've obtained, she, in the 70s, started getting a little cash strapped with having to downsize her apartments and starting to sell off some of her jewelry that she had had since the 30s and 40s. But that also came with her being very inactive with television and film, and by then she had been retired by Pepsi Cola.
So did I read in either in the chronology or the TV appearances, she would make about $265 when she was on Merv Griffin or Merv Griffin, or who's the other one? Mike Douglas.
Right.
So those talk show appearances were about $250. Was that it?
That was the going rate, I believe, for a lot of salaries for guest spots on those types of television shows at the time. Yeah.
Wow. So there was certainly a money factor, and she wasn't alone. I mean, Bette Davis made these appearances. Those talk shows pretty much were just a cycle for keeping some of those names and faces in front of the audiences, but the faces that were watching the shows were very much remembered and loved who those stars are. So it was made them very accessible and prolonged their careers and maybe softened their careers to get them into TV. When I think about somebody like a Helen Hayes or an Agnes Moorehead, just the bigger names that ultimately did end up successfully on TV.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you get the sense, from any of her writings or correspondence, when she did TV, what did she have connections? I mean, did any of those TV opportunities come easily to her, or did she have a reputation amongst the TV community already for being hard to work with?
Well, Joan never really had a reputation for being hard to work with. That's sort of a part of the film lore and myth about her. Most people that worked with her always had very good things to say about her. They always said that she was extremely professional. She would show up on time, or if before time, and always did her very best on everything she worked on. There were a few instances within the 60s where she had issues. One in particular was with the I Love Lucy show. She had issues with Lucille Ball during the filming of that, and by that time, she did have an issue with alcohol. And when you watch the actual episode that she appears on, I have to say that she is drunk on it. There's no denying that. She's slurring her speech. She holds herself together, but her speech wise is pretty slurred. But as far as a connection in television, she had plenty of connections within the world of entertainment. However, by the 60s, there was an all new, fresh group of people coming up that were not the old school people that Joan knew. And that's where she ran into issues with trying to find people who had worked with her previously to work with her on television. But one case, for instance, is the Night Gallery episode she did. That was directed by Steven Spielberg. It was his first directing job, and he was very young. And when she found out he was the director, she asked for another director because she did not think he was capable of directing the episode and doing a good job at it. However, after meeting with him and starting the first days of working with him, she found him to be very good, and she was very impressed with him. So she even bluffed to some of the other people who were working on the production, who were some older crew members, that she had worked with him before, which was not true, just to where he would gain the respect of the crew and the other cast members, that the same respect that she had found for him. And that was something that Steven Spielberg later talked about and wrote about, was how appreciative he was of Joan Crawford with that production that he did with her. But she did express some contempt later in life for what Hollywood had become, and how hard it was for her to get a starring role on a television series.
Can we take a step back? You mentioned the Lucy Show. The Lucy Show was the second iteration of Lucille Ball doing a sitcom, and Vivian Vance was her sidekick still. And the episode in particular that featured Joan Crawford as a significant, I mean, she was the point of this episode, 1968, and it's called Lucy and the Lost Star. And I have a hard time getting through. I got to about the 10-minute mark, and the whole thing made me so sad. It made me sad that these three women, who really were very talented, were working so hard on a premise that did not have as much dignity as I would have hoped. It seemed like cheap laughs, and maybe I should have watched the whole thing, but I honestly couldn't bring myself to do it. And then when Mr. Mooney comes on, my feminist side just ratchets up. So what were you able to, tell us a little bit more about that Lucy and the Lost Star episode, and what it is you understand to be how it came about, or any other backstory you have about that. It is available on YouTube, you've put it up there.
Yes.
It's on Bryan Johnson's YouTube channel, the concluding chapter of Joan Crawford. But tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, she was signed to do the episode, and like you say, it was a little bit of an awkward episode. I don't think it was by any means the best written episode of the Lucy Show or anything that Lucille Ball did. But it was filmed in late 1967 is when she signed on to it, and it was filmed and premiered in early 1968. And there was issues with Lucille Ball and Joan on it. Lucille wanted to fire Joan off the production of it. She wanted to replace her with Gloria Swanson. And that was because Joan was drinking on the set. And Lucille Ball found her to be unprofessional because of that. This is one of the only and very rare instances where Joan was not professional on a film set. There was never, from what I understand, harsh words spoken between the two women, but I think it was clear between the two of them that they did not find that they had any real chemistry as women working together or as actresses on the screen. But it was something that I think, and it's visible within the episode, I think, that Joan had trouble getting through, but she did get through it. She was not something that I don't think she ever spoke about. It's not something that's really commented about later, which indicates that she wasn't probably proud of that. Usually, things that she was proud of, she would speak about within her interviews at the time or within any publication that may come out, like in a magazine or so forth. And there's not very much as far as quotations by Joan regarding that, nor is there really by Lucille Ball. So, and one interesting aspect is that was the last episode, I believe, that featured Vivian Vance, was the one with Joan Crawford.
Oh, everybody loves Vivian Vance. So let's shift topics a little bit. And with regard to all of this research you've done, what have been some of the more unlikely sources of information that fell into your lap, or people who just were more than happy to not just share their story, their experience, but also perhaps made connections on your behalf?
I think probably the most fascinating source of information has been from the people who are still alive who interacted with Joan Crawford and knew her during this time. I've been very fortunate in tracking down a variety of people, the children of Pepsi Cola executives that knew Joan very well, the children of Al Still that I've tracked down that spoke very well of Joan. Everyone also always had very good things to say about Joan Crawford that I've talked with. There's only a few instances where there was someone who had something negative to say about their involvement or interaction with her. But probably the most interesting person that I was able to speak with is the family and the grandson and grandchildren of her maid Mamacita. They had very interesting stories to tell about Joan and about their grandmother. I was able to devote an entire page on the website to her maid Mamacita. She died in Texas. That is where Joan Crawford was born. They both died in May, only 2 years apart. Joan died in May 1977. Mamacita died in May 1979. Mamacita's first name was Anna. That was Joan Crawford's mother's name, was Anna. And she called Mamacita Mama for short. Now, why there would have been that, if there was maybe a psychological connection for why she would call her Mama, I don't know. But I always found those very fascinating pieces of information that came from her, from Mamacita's family.
Thinking a little bit about, I talked a little earlier about how there were other big film stars who either made it over to TV in the twilight years of their careers. Olivia de Havilland did a number of made-for-TV movies. Even Katharine Hepburn ultimately did one. Helen Hayes was on the Snoop Sisters back in the 70s. Barbara Stanwyck is really probably the most notable, the first, I think, successful film star who landed squarely in a successful TV series, The Big Valley. But you have no interest in further documenting any of those actresses? You're going to stick with Joan Crawford?
I think I will be sticking with Joan Crawford. However, I will say that as far as the leading actresses who were able to make the transition to television, Barbara Stanwyck, for instance, that would have been a wonderful role for Joan Crawford. The interesting aspect about Joan and also with Bette Davis with their television careers, Bette Davis tried much harder than Joan Crawford to launch her own television show. She did, I believe, a dozen or more pilots during the 60s and 70s to try to launch her own television show, but it never worked. And I think sometimes you can have people whose personalities and persona is so large, such as Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, that it's very hard to find a fitting place for them on television in a leading role. That is something that's going to be shown every week in a leading role. Barbara Stanwyck had, I think, a little bit more of that softness to her, and was able to make a good transition to where she was not afraid to take a little bit of a step back from the camera and let someone have a little bit more screen time than her. I don't know if that would have worked as well with Joan Crawford. The one aspect of many of the projects that Joan Crawford did for television was that she was up front and foremost the lead on whatever she was involved with. She wanted in films her name above the title. And in television, she wanted the episode, if it was an episode of a television show, she wanted it to be that the circumstances of the situation and the other characters within the television program revolved around her. So with that, it's probably what made it difficult for her to find a continuing starring role on television. At least that's my theory of it.
Yeah, yes, she set a very high bar. All right, so we're kind of getting to the end of, without delving into, which I think we could do, all 8 episodes of Feud and talk about just the richness of her turquoise walls and the apparel, all of her clothing and sort of a lot of her signature looks and the work that's been done online comparing Jessica Lange's portrayal to the real life, the Oscars appearance and everything. Let's get back for a minute to your project, the concluding chapter, and kind of where you see this going. Is this just sort of a maintenance mode at this point, or do you have a big project on the horizon?
Well, the concluding chapter of Crawford is continuously growing. It has been since it was launched 15 years ago. And sometimes it's a slower growth. Sometimes it's a fast growth. However, there are going to be some very big announcements on the website with some of the Crawford information that I have that I think that a lot of fans are going to appreciate. I think a lot of people in general would appreciate that are fans of film and so forth. Regarding her Pepsi Cola career, I've completed a lot of research into it, and it's not very well known information that I think that a lot of people are really going to love to learn about. There may be some more larger advancements coming soon, but I'm not exactly sure when, but pretty soon. So the best thing is probably just to keep an eye on the website. But they're coming. It will be maybe later than sooner, but there's going to be some very big research developments about Joan Crawford and her life at this time coming forth for the public to enjoy.
Excellent. Now, about the public's enjoyment of all the information that you have housed at that website, as well as what we have to recognize is the fact that the writers and the researchers who built Feud, the FX TV series of 8 episodes, relied on some of your original research. And, there are people in ivory towers, there are professors of media studies who make this a part of their career. They're paid to do this research. You are not paid to do this research. You are doing it of your own interest and your hobby and your dedication to preserving a fact-based archive of a very talented woman's career. So, listeners of Advanced TV Herstory, you do not pay for my podcast. There is no advertising in this podcast at all. But I would recommend that if you have enjoyed this segment about Joan Crawford, that you head over to the concluding chapter website, and Bryan has a donate button, and go ahead and send $10, because ultimately, it does take money to put this information out there, and YouTube has made it a zero game. Everybody expects it for free, but the amount of work that goes in and the labor of love is not for money, but there are some expenses. And for Bryan to take the next steps forward, it seems to me that that's one way that you can show your support of him and your appreciation for the work that he's brought to the forefront and also made available to the people at Feud, even if he didn't get recognized. So there's my plug to you, Bryan. With one last question then, I guess, how can people get a hold of you? And again, remind us of the URL where we can find the concluding chapter and any other platforms that you house information at.
Well, the website is The Concluding Chapter of Crawford. It is www.theconcludingchapterofcrawford.com. If anyone needs to contact me, my email is located, I think, on every single page near the bottom of the website. I also have a Facebook page for the website, which is by the same name, The Concluding Chapter of Crawford. It has nearly 45,000 followers on Facebook. It is the largest Joan Crawford Facebook page and the largest amount of Joan Crawford fans in one spot online. There is also a Facebook group that I house for Joan Crawford, which has over 10,000 members. And I also have the YouTube channel, which is approaching, I think, 100 videos of Joan Crawford. I'm not sure if it's quite 100 yet, but I think it's around 80-something videos of Joan Crawford that are featuring her television work, her interviews, other interviews with people, documentaries, and so forth on Joan Crawford. So I would suggest anyone interested in Joan Crawford and any of her work or personal life, visit one of those resources. I think that they'll be very happy with what they find.
Well, that is a tremendous array of offerings that you have out there for free. And it's amazing the number of people on Facebook who probably are learning more and perhaps putting it into a little bit more of a context of their understanding and appreciation of a stellar film career, but you're the one who keeps it fresh and relevant. So the one last thing I will say is any listeners of Advanced TV Herstory, if you have some elderly member of your family who worked for Pepsi or worked for Warner's or, was in the business and has any association to Joan Crawford, and you know that they haven't already contacted Bryan, that you make that connection so that his sources and his feed remains fresh, and he's able to bring all of that to the worldwide viewing public that followed Joan Crawford's career. So, Bryan Johnson, thank you so much for the time that you've given me to just really ask all of the probing questions that I had coming out of watching Feud and loving that. And thank you for making all of this information available and putting a new light on what it must have been to be a mid-career or a middle-aged aging actress in the 60s. That was a tough time. And I think we're all a little bit more sensitive to what that means. And we wouldn't have that without your information. So thank you. So there you have it. Economics, pride, ego. If you enjoyed FX's Feud as much as I did, it's a reminder that those golden days of Hollywood left a huge amount of talent sitting on the shelf. They put them out to pasture with no hope of them ever just having tremendous closure or advancing their talents into their golden years, although some of them did. But that's not so much the case today. In fact, future installments of Advanced TV Herstory will explore other big names of the silver screen who actually successfully managed the transition to TV. But why did it happen for some and not for Crawford and Davis? To recognize really how far this concentrated power in the industry, how it is that film and TV cross over and all of a sudden you've got a star on Broadway, a TV star appearing in something on Broadway to sell out shows. That's how far this industry has come. And you really just have to look at the irony that it was Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon, two very accomplished actresses who've earned great praise in the film industry, who in fact portrayed these Hollywood legends on the FX series. So, something to think about. I have to give my many, many thanks to Bryan Johnson for delivering an incredibly informative interview, and to David Brown, my audio wizard, for making it seem like we were in your kitchen drinking coffee, drinking tab, whatever is in your glass. Audio clips from The Lucy Show, that episode entitled Lucy and the Lost Star from 1968, came from YouTube. You'll find it there. And the music contained in our new introduction is called Take Me Higher by Jazar, and it's found at freemusicarchive.org. We love Free Music Archive. And just so you know, Advanced TV Herstory is a part of Core Temp Arts Network, a place where you'll find podcasts about TV, pop culture, and interviews with smart and interesting people. Please take a moment to review this podcast at our hosting site Libsyn or at iTunes. We welcome your feedback directly to advancedtvherstory@gmail.com, or keep it to 140 characters and tweet it for the whole world to see. Just make sure you include our handle @tvherstory. Lastly, look for scripts and archives at tvherstory.com and share them with others you think who like to think about women in TV. But maybe they're overwhelmed by the whole notion of technology and downloading things to devices, and it's all too complicated. Just go ahead and let them know that they can queue up tvherstory.com and find what they're looking for. Or they can read what they're looking for if they're sitting in the dentist's office. But one way or another, every share and recommendation that you make means a lot to me. So thank you, and thanks, as always, for listening. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtamparts.com.